I'm Hannah Mitchell, 29, and I've always been the family disappointment according to my mother. When I heard about my cousin Rebecca's wedding last spring, I was excited until I learned the devastating truth. Everyone in our extended family was invited except me. My own mother's words cut deeper than any knife could. "You'd just ruin her day," she said matter-of-factly, as if discussing the weather. That moment crystallized years of rejection and pain I'd experienced at the hands of people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. Before I tell you how this family drama unfolded, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from, and hit subscribe if you've ever felt like the black sheep in your family. Growing up in a middle-class neighborhood in Boston wasn't terrible on the surface. We had a comfortable colonial-style house with a small backyard, and from the outside, we probably looked like the perfect American family. But inside those walls, I was constantly walking on eggshells around my mother, Clara. She had a vision of what her daughter should be, and I never quite matched it. My father, Greg, was physically present but emotionally absent. He worked as an accountant at a respected firm, and spent most evenings buried in paperwork or watching sports. He witnessed my mother's criticism, but rarely intervened. His standard response was, "That's just how your mother is, Hannah. Don't take it personally." But how could I not take it personally, when every aspect of my existence was scrutinized and found lacking? The comparisons to my cousin Rebecca started early. Rebecca was only 3 months older than me, but in my mother's eyes, she might as well have been a different species. Rebecca had naturally blonde hair that fell in perfect waves, while my brown hair was always too frizzy, or unkempt no matter how I styled it. Rebecca excelled in math and science, heading for a sensible career in medicine. I struggled with those subjects, but flourished in English and art, interests my mother dismissed as impractical hobbies. "Why can't you be more like Rebecca?" became the soundtrack of my childhood. Rebecca got straight A's. I got BS and CS with the occasional A in art or literature. Rebecca played volleyball and made the varsity team. I tried out for the school play and got the lead, which my mother attended with a pinched expression. "Theater people are so dramatic," she said afterward. "It's not a real accomplishment, Hannah." Rebecca's Sweet 16 party is etched in my memory like an old scar that still aches when the weather changes. I was 14 at the time, awkward in the way many 14-year-olds are, with braces and the beginning of acne. My Aunt Meredith had spared no expense for her daughter's celebration, renting a hall and hiring a DJ. All the family was invited, along with Rebecca's many friends. "We need to find you something appropriate to wear," my mother announced the week before the party. I had already picked out a simple blue dress I felt comfortable in, but my mother insisted on taking me shopping. She selected a pink frilly dress 2 sizes too small, claiming, "This will motivate you to lose some weight." On the day of the party, I could barely breathe in the tight fabric. The dress dug into my armpits and made red marks on my skin. While Rebecca floated around in her custom-made gown, accepting compliments and opening expensive gifts, I sat in a corner trying to become invisible. My mother spent the evening apologizing to relatives for my appearance. "Hannah's going through a phase," she would say with a tight smile. "She's not taking care of herself like she should." My father brought me a plate of cake and sat beside me for a few minutes, patting my hand awkwardly before being called away by a colleague. That small kindness nearly made me cry. Rebecca wasn't directly mean to me. That's what makes this story complicated. She never teased or bullied me, but she also never stood up for me. When my mother would compare us, Rebecca would look uncomfortable, but say nothing. She accepted the preferential treatment as her due, and perhaps I can't blame her for that. Why question a system that benefits you? As I moved into my teenage years, I developed severe anxiety and self-doubt. I began to believe what my mother constantly implied. I wasn't good enough. I wasn't pretty enough, smart enough, accomplished enough. I started avoiding family gatherings when possible, making excuses about homework or feeling ill. Being alone was less painful than being around people who made me feel worthless. My rebellion started small. At 16, I dyed a streak of blue in my brown hair. My mother was horrified. "What will people think?" she demanded. I didn't have an answer then, but now I know. I wanted them to think I was different from my family. I wanted to signal to the world that I wasn't one of them. The blue streak led to more. By 17, my hair had been every color of the rainbow. I saved my babysitting money to buy clothes from thrift stores that horrified my mother: combat boots, flannel shirts, vintage dresses that didn't fit her preppy aesthetic. Each change to my appearance was a small declaration of independence, a way of saying, if I'll never be good enough for you, I might as well be myself. My high school graduation should have been a celebration. I had maintained AB average despite my struggles with math and science. I had been accepted to 3 colleges, including one with a respected art program. But when I walked across the stage to receive my diploma, I looked out at the audience to see my mother checking her watch and my father staring blankly ahead. At the small family gathering afterward, my mother refused to throw me a graduation party, saying there wasn't anything special about barely passing. The conversation centered around Rebecca's college plans and her pre-med program. When my aunt finally asked about my plans, my mother interjected before I could answer. "Hannah's going to community college first. Her grades weren't good enough for a real university." This was a lie. I had been accepted to real universities, including the prestigious art school I dreamed of attending. But in that moment, I realized something important: my mother would never see me clearly. She would always distort my reality to fit her narrative. And I decided then that I would need to build a life outside her shadow. Against my family's wishes, I enrolled in the Rhode Island School of Design. My portfolio had earned me a partial scholarship, and I was ecstatic. This was my chance to develop my artistic talents and find my own path. When I announced my decision at dinner, my mother's face turned to stone. "Art school," she scoffed. "That's not a real education. You'll end up waiting tables for the rest of your life." My father looked concerned but only said, "It's very expensive, Hannah. We were hoping you'd choose something more practical, like business school." They reluctantly agreed to pay for my first semester, making it clear this was all the support I would receive. "When you fail and come home with your tail between your legs, don't expect us to bail you out," my mother warned. I moved into my dorm with a mixture of terror and elation. For the first time in my life, I was surrounded by people who thought like me, who saw art as a legitimate pursuit rather than a frivolous hobby. My roommate, a graphic design major from California, complimented my blue hair and asked about my photography portfolio instead of criticizing my choices. But the financial reality quickly set in. After that first semester, I was on my own. I took out student loans and worked 3 part-time jobs: morning shifts at a coffee shop near campus, weekend hours at a clothing store, and occasional gigs photographing local events. Sometimes I would go 48 hours without sleep, moving from classes to work to studying in an exhausted days. Despite the exhaustion, I maintained a 3.7 GPA, and began developing a distinctive photographic style that focused on urban landscapes and portraits that captured people in unguarded moments. My professors encouraged me to submit my work to student exhibitions, and to my surprise, my photographs received positive attention. During my sophomore year, I met Jasmine in a digital imaging class. She was everything I needed in a friend: supportive, honest, and fiercely loyal. When I told her about my family situation, she didn't offer empty platitudes. Instead, she invited me home with her for Thanksgiving, introducing me to her large, boisterous family, who asked about my photography with genuine interest. This is what family should feel like, I thought as I helped Jasmine's mother wash dishes after dinner. No one criticized my appearance, or made me feel like an inconvenience. They simply accepted my presence as natural and welcome. My communication with my own family dwindled to occasional phone calls and obligatory holiday visits. Each interaction left me emotionally drained. My mother would inspect me from head to toe, noting any new tattoos or hair colors with thinly veiled disgust. My father would ask generic questions about how school was going, without any real interest in the specifics of my education or accomplishments. The Thanksgiving visit 5 years ago was the breaking point. I had just received my first major photography internship with a well-respected studio in Chicago. My hair was a vibrant blue, and I had recently gotten a small camera tattoo on my wrist to celebrate the internship. I was proud of myself and foolishly thought my parents might share that feeling. As soon as I walked through the door, my mother fixated on my appearance. What employer would hire someone who looks like that? She demanded, pointing at my hair and visible tattoo. You're never going to get a real job if you insist on looking like a delinquent. I took a deep breath and told her about the internship. Actually, I already have a job. A good one, with Langston Studios in Chicago. They are known for their editorial work in major magazines. My mother dismissed this with a wave of her hand. Taking pictures isn't a career, Hannah. It's a hobby. When are you going to grow up and stop playing around? I looked to my father for support, but he was suddenly very interested in the football game on television. Rebecca was there with her new boyfriend, a medical student like herself. They exchanged uncomfortable glances, but said nothing. After dinner, I helped clear the table while my mother fawned over Rebecca's boyfriend, telling him how wonderful it was that he was pursuing a respectable profession. I escaped to the bathroom and called Jasmine, tears streaming down my face. I can't do this anymore, I told her. They'll never see me as I am. Then maybe it's time to stop trying, she replied gently. You can't change them, Hannah. You can only change how much power you give them over your happiness. I returned to school after that Thanksgiving with a new resolve. I would build a life that made me happy, whether my family approved or not. When the internship in Chicago turned into a job offer, I accepted immediately. Moving to a new city, far from Boston and my family's influence, felt like freedom. In Chicago, I found my stride both professionally and personally. I rented a small apartment in an artistic neighborhood and decorated it with thrift store finds and prints of my own photographs. I made friends with other creative professionals who valued my eye for composition and distinctive style. My work began appearing in local galleries, then regional art magazines. But success didn't heal the wound of family rejection. Each achievement was bittersweet, without anyone from my blood family to share it with. I created a chosen family instead: Jasmine, who visited often, my colleagues at the studio, neighbors who became friends. We celebrated holidays together, supported each other's artistic endeavors, and provided the emotional safety net that my biological family never had. My parents never visited my apartment in Chicago. They didn't attend any of my gallery showings. When I called to share good news, a photograph being purchased by a collector, a feature in a respected arts publication, my mother would change the subject to Rebecca's accomplishments in medical school. I learned to stop seeking their approval. I shared less and less about my life, and our already infrequent calls became more distant and formal. We were related by blood, but strangers in every other way. And though I had built a fulfilling life, there remained a small, wounded part of me that still longed for the family connection I'd never truly had. It was a Tuesday afternoon in March when my phone lit up with my mother's name. I was in the middle of editing a photo shoot for a local theater company, but my heart still skipped a beat at the sight of her name. No matter how much distance I put between us, some childish part of me still hoped for her approval. Hello, I answered, trying to sound casual, as if we spoke regularly rather than once every few months. Hannah, my mother said, her voice carrying that familiar note of disapproval. How are you? I'm good, Mom. Busy with work. How are you and Dad? We're fine. Your father's blood pressure is a bit high, but is taking medication now. The doctor says he needs to watch his salt intake. We exchanged awkward small talk for a few minutes. She mentioned the harsh winter in Boston, and I told her Chicago hadn't been much better. She complained about the new neighbors whose dog barked too much. I asked about my father's golf game. The conversation felt like a script we were both reading without any genuine connection. Then, almost as an afterthought, she said, I suppose you've heard about Rebecca's engagement. I hadn't. Rebecca and I hadn't spoken directly in over a year, though I occasionally saw updates on social media. No, actually. That's great news. Who's she marrying? Dr. Michael Thornton. He's a cardiologist at Mass General. They met during her residency. They're getting married in June at the Ocean View Club. It's going to be quite an event. Meredith has hired the best wedding planner in Boston. I felt a pang of hurt that Rebecca hadn't told me herself, but pushed it aside. That sounds lovely. I'll have to find a nice gift to send. There was a pause, then my mother said, well, that's partly why I'm calling. The invitations are going out next week, and I wanted to explain why you won't be receiving one. The words hit me like a physical blow. I had assumed I would be invited. Despite our differences, we were family, and I had attended all the major family events over the years, even if they were painful experiences. What do you mean? I asked, my voice suddenly small. Rebecca and Michael are having a very traditional wedding. Everyone will be dressed formally, and the photographer from Wedding Style magazine will be there. It's going to be featured in their fall issue. I waited, knowing there was more. The thing is, Hannah, my mother continued, her tone matter-of-fact, with your blue hair and those tattoos, you'd just ruin her day. You'd stick out in all the photos. Meredith and Rebecca both agree, it would be best if you didn't attend. I felt as if all the air had been sucked from the room. My hand tightened around the phone. Let me get this straight, I said, my voice shaking. I'm being excluded from my own cousin's wedding because of how I look. Don't be dramatic, Hannah. It's not personal. It's about Rebecca's special day. She wants everything to be perfect. Surely you can understand that. But it was personal. It was deeply, painfully personal. Does Rebecca actually feel this way? Or is this coming from you and Aunt Meredith? I demanded. Everyone agrees, my mother insisted. Your father, your aunt and uncle, Rebecca and Michael. We all think it's for the best. You wouldn't enjoy it anyway, you always look miserable at family gatherings. I looked miserable because they made me feel miserable. Because every interaction was laced with criticism and comparison. But I didn't say this. Instead, I said, I want to hear this from Rebecca directly. There's no need to drag her into this. She's very busy with wedding plans and her residency. I've told you the situation. I ended the call shortly after, promising myself I wouldn't cry until I hung up. As soon as I did, the tears came in a flood that I couldn't stop. I curled up on my couch, phone clutched in my hand, and sobbed until my throat was raw. When I could breathe again, I found Rebecca's number and called her. It went to voicemail twice, before she finally answered. Hannah. Is everything okay? I'm between patients. My mother just told me I'm not invited to your wedding because of how I look, I said, not bothering with pleasantries. There was a long pause. "It's not just that," Rebecca finally said. It's my special day, and I need everything to be perfect. The magazine feature is a big deal. So I'm not perfect enough for your wedding photos. Is that what you're saying? You know what I mean, Hannah. You've always liked standing out and being different. This day isn't about making a statement. It's about tradition and family. I am family, I said, my voice breaking. At least, I thought I was. You are, but, she sighed. Look, I have to get back to my patients. I'm sorry you're upset, but this is what we've decided. After she hung up, I called Jasmine. She answered on the first ring, and as soon as I heard her voice, I broke down again. They're not inviting me to Rebecca's wedding, I managed between sobs. My mother says I'd ruin it because of how I look. I'm coming over, Jasmine said immediately. Don't move. I'll bring ice cream. An hour later, Jasmine sat beside me on the couch as I relayed the entire conversation. They've always made me feel like an outsider, I said, spooning cookie dough ice cream directly from the container. But this is different. This is saying I'm so unacceptable that I can't even be in the same room as them on an important day. Like I'm something to be ashamed of. Jasmine's eyes flashed with anger. They should be ashamed. Not you. Never you. What hurts the most is that everyone agreed. My dad, Rebecca, everyone. They all think I'm not good enough to be included. Jasmine put her arm around me. Their loss. Seriously. You are talented, kind, and authentic. If they can't see that, they don't deserve you. Her words were comforting, but they couldn't erase the pain of being explicitly rejected by my entire family. That night, after Jasmine left, I looked at my reflection in the bathroom mirror, blue hair, tattoos visible on my arms and wrist, the small nose ring I'd gotten last year. I didn't see someone shameful. I saw someone who had found the courage to be herself, despite constant criticism. But for the first time in years, I wondered if the price of authenticity was too high. The days following my mother's call blended together in a fog of grief and anger. I called in sick to work for the first time since I'd started at the studio, unable to face people or muster the creative energy my job required. I turned off my phone after Jasmine left, not wanting to speak to anyone else. I spent the first day in bed, alternating between crying and staring blankly at the ceiling. The rejection reopened wounds I thought had scarred over years ago. All the progress I'd made in building my self-esteem seemed to evaporate, leaving me as vulnerable and hurt as the teenage girl in the too-tight pink dress at Rebecca's Sweet 16. On the second day, I dragged myself to the shower, but couldn't find the energy to do more than that. I sat on my couch in pajamas, mindlessly watching cooking shows and ignoring the growing pile of dishes in my sink. On the third day, I finally answered Jasmine's increasingly worried texts. She came over immediately, surveyed my unwashed hair and the takeout containers accumulating on my coffee table, and gently but firmly guided me back to the shower. You don't have to be okay, she said as she picked up around my apartment. But you do have to take care of yourself. I made an emergency appointment with my therapist, Dr. Lena Martin, whom I'd been seeing monthly since moving to Chicago. She fit me in between her regular clients, her kind eyes concerned as I recounted what had happened. This exclusion has triggered your core wound, she observed. The belief that you're fundamentally unacceptable. I nodded, twisting a tissue in my hands. Because I am. To them, at least. To them, she emphasized. Not universally. Not to your friends, your colleagues, or the people who appreciate your art. This is about their limitations, not yours. We spent the hour untangling my family's behavior from my self-worth, a separation that was easier to understand intellectually than emotionally. I left with homework, to write down moments when I felt valued and accepted for who I truly was. That evening, I pulled out an old photo album I rarely looked at. It contained family pictures from my childhood through high school graduation. In almost every image, I looked uncomfortable, stiff posture, forced smile, eyes that revealed my anxiety. There were no photos of me with my blue hair or tattoos. Those changes had come after I'd left for college, after I'd started to break free. I contrasted those images with the more recent photos on my phone, laughing with Jasmine at a concert, posing with colleagues after a successful gallery showing, spontaneous selfies taken on good hair days when I felt confident. The difference was stark. In these photos, I looked alive, authentic, present. But seeing the old family photos reopened the wound. Despite everything, these people were my blood relations. Their rejection shouldn't matter so much, but it did. The next day, I logged onto social media for the first time since the call, and was immediately confronted with wedding preparation posts. Rebecca had shared photos of her dress shopping expedition with her bridesmaids, including 2 of our cousins. My Aunt Meredith had posted about the menu tasting at the venue. There were excited comments from extended family members I rarely saw, but who had apparently all received their invitations. I closed the app, feeling sick. Then my phone pinged with a message from a cousin I hadn't spoken to in years. "Hey Hannah, heard you're not coming to Becca's wedding. Everything okay?" Similar messages trickled in over the next few days. Some were genuinely concerned, others clearly fishing for gossip. Most painful were the awkward explanations people offered. "Rebecca probably thought you'd be too busy with your art stuff to attend. I'm sure it wasn't personal, they had to draw the line somewhere with the guest list. Maybe you could come to the reception later. After the formal pictures." Each message confirmed what I already knew. Everyone was aware of my exclusion, and no one had stood up for me. I returned to work after a week, forcing myself through the motions of normalcy. My boss, Angela, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s who had built the studio from nothing, noticed my subdued mood immediately. "You don't have to talk about it," she said when she found me staring blankly at my computer screen instead of editing. "But if you want to, I'm here." To my surprise, I did want to talk to her. Angela had always been straightforward with me, critical when necessary, but genuinely supportive of my talent. She listened without interrupting as I explained about the wedding and my family's history of making me feel inadequate. "I keep trying to tell myself it doesn't matter," I finished. "That I've built a good life without their approval. But somehow, it still hurts so much." Angela was quiet for a moment, then said, "Of course it hurts. Rejection always hurts, but rejection from the people who are supposed to love you unconditionally. That's a special kind of pain." She leaned forward. "But Hannah, I want you to consider something. Your family has consistently failed to see your value. Their judgment is fundamentally flawed. So why are you still giving it so much weight?" It was a question I couldn't answer immediately, but it stayed with me. Why did I still crave approval from people who had never been able to give it? Why did I measure my worth by their distorted standards? As the wedding date drew closer, my emotional state deteriorated. I checked social media compulsively, torturing myself with updates about the approaching event. I imagined all my relatives gathered together, perhaps briefly wondering about my absence before moving on with the celebration. Would anyone even miss me? The night before the wedding, I hit rock bottom. I sat on my kitchen floor at 3 a.m, scrolling through photos of the rehearsal dinner, a glass of wine beside me. Everyone looked happy, perfect. My mother stood proudly beside Rebecca, her face glowing with the approval she had never shown me. I must have fallen asleep there, because the next thing I knew, someone was pounding on my door. Disoriented and hungover, I stumbled to answer it. Jasmine stood there with 3 other friends, all looking determined. "This is an intervention," she announced, pushing past me into the apartment. "It's time to stop wallowing." My friends cleaned my apartment while I showered. They made me breakfast and coffee. Then Jasmine sat me down for a reality check. "You've given your family enough power over you," she said firmly. "Today, they're celebrating without you. That's their choice and their loss. But what are you going to do with today?" It was the question that would change everything. The morning of Rebecca's wedding dawned clear and beautiful in Chicago, just as I imagined it would in Boston. For a brief moment after waking, I forgot about everything: the exclusion, the pain, the intervention. Then reality crashed back, and I felt the familiar ache in my chest. But something was different. Maybe it was Jasmine's question still echoing in my mind: "What are you going to do with today?" Maybe it was the culmination of years of therapy and growing self-awareness. Or maybe I had simply reached my breaking point. Whatever the reason, I got out of bed with a new resolve. I would no longer let my family define my worth. I had a regular session scheduled with Dr. Martin that morning, and for once, I arrived early, determined to use the time productively rather than just venting my pain. "I can't change them," I told her as soon as I sat down. "I've been trying my whole life to earn their approval, and it never works. So I need to stop trying." Dr. Martin nodded encouragingly. "That's a powerful realization. What does stopping look like to you?" "Setting boundaries. Not sharing important parts of my life that they'll only criticize. Not expecting them to be proud of me or supportive." I took a deep breath. Maybe even limiting contact, if that's what I need to protect myself. We spent the hour discussing healthy boundaries and self-acceptance. Dr. Martin reminded me that setting boundaries wasn't about punishing my family, but about caring for myself. "Boundaries are acts of self-respect," she said. "They say, this is how I need to be treated to remain in relationship with you." As I was leaving her office, my phone rang. It was Angela from the studio. "Hannah, I know this is last minute, but we have a situation. The photographer scheduled for the Wyland Gallery opening tonight just cancelled food poisoning. I know you're going through a tough time, but you're the only one with the right aesthetic for this event. It would be a major opportunity for you. Wyland represents some serious collectors." My first instinct was to decline. I wasn't in an emotional state to work, especially at a high-pressure event. But then I thought about the alternative: sitting alone in my apartment, obsessing over a wedding happening hundreds of miles away where I wasn't welcome. "What time do you need me there?" I heard myself asking. 7 sharp. Wear something artsy but professional. And Hannah. This could be a big break. The gallery owner specifically requested you when I mentioned you might be available. I hung up feeling a strange mixture of anxiety and anticipation. I had 4 hours to prepare mentally and physically for an important professional event. The timing was terrible, but also perfect. I wouldn't have a minute to think about what was happening in Boston. I spent the afternoon preparing my equipment and choosing my outfit carefully. Black wide-leg pants, a vintage silver blazer over a simple white top, and my most comfortable ankle boots. I kept my makeup minimal, but took extra care with it. Looking in the mirror, I saw a professional photographer ready for an important assignment, not a rejected family member licking her wounds. The Wyland Gallery was in one of Chicago's most prestigious arts districts. As I approached the gleaming modern building, camera bag over my shoulder, I felt a flutter of nerves that had nothing to do with family drama and everything to do with professional opportunity. This was my world, the one I had built for myself despite my family's lack of support. The gallery was already filling with well-dressed patrons when I arrived. The exhibition featured large-scale abstract paintings paired with experimental sculpture pieces. My job was to capture not just the artwork, but the atmosphere and interactions of the evening. I slipped into professional mode, moving through the crowd with my camera, finding interesting angles and moments. 2 hours into the event, I was so absorbed in my work that I had completely forgotten what day it was. "You have a fantastic eye," said a deep voice behind me as I adjusted my lens for a shot. I turned to find a tall man with silver-streaked dark hair watching me with interest. "The way you just composed that shot of the conversation in front of the red canvas, you captured something real there." "Thank you," I replied, checking the image on my display. "I'm trying to show how people interact with the art, not just document the pieces themselves. That's exactly what's missing from most art event photography." He extended his hand. "Jackson Reed. I curate for the Brennan Contemporary Art Museum." I shook his hand, trying not to show how impressed I was. The Brennan was one of the most respected contemporary art museums in the Midwest. "Hannah Mitchell. I'm filling in tonight, but I usually work with Langston Studios." "Well, Hannah Mitchell, your fill-in work is better than most people's dedicated efforts." His eyes flickered to my blue hair and the tattoos visible below my blazer sleeves. "Your personal style is as interesting as your photographic one." There was no judgment in his observation, only genuine appreciation. We talked for several minutes about photography approaches and the current exhibition, before he was pulled away by another guest. Before leaving, he handed me his business card. "Send me your portfolio. We're putting together a photography exhibition for the fall, focusing on urban identity. Your perspective might be a good fit." I slipped the card into my pocket, a warm sense of validation spreading through me. Here, in my chosen world, my appearance wasn't a liability. It was part of my identity as an artist, something that made me memorable and distinct. As I continued working, my phone vibrated in my pocket. Checking it during a quiet moment, I saw my father's name on the screen. I stepped outside to the gallery's small balcony and answered. "Dad? Is everything okay?" He rarely called me directly. "Hannah." His voice sounded strained. "I'm calling from the wedding. I just wanted to check on you." I leaned against the railing, the cool night air against my face. "I'm working, actually. Photographing an important gallery opening." "Oh?" He sounded surprised, as if he'd expected to find me falling apart. "That's good. I wanted you to know I didn't agree with the decision not to invite you. Your mother and Meredith insisted, and I didn't fight hard enough against it." It was the closest my father had ever come to acknowledging his failure to protect me from my mother's criticism. The admission unlocked something in me. "Why didn't you ever stand up for me, Dad? All those years Mom made me feel like I wasn't good enough. You saw it happening and said nothing." There was a long silence. In the background, I could hear music and laughter from the wedding reception. Finally, he sighed. "I don't have a good answer, Hannah. I told myself it was easier to go along, to keep the peace. I was wrong, and I'm sorry." Those words, "I was wrong, and I'm sorry," were ones I'd never expected to hear from either of my parents. They didn't erase years of hurt, but they cracked open a door I'd thought permanently closed. "I appreciate that, Dad. I really do." I took a deep breath. "I need you to know something. I'm not coming to family events where I'm made to feel unwelcome, or where my mother criticizes me. I'm choosing self-respect over painful connections." "I understand." He paused. Would you be open to having lunch with just me next time I'm in Chicago? I'd like to get to know the person you've become. I'd like that, I said, surprised to find I meant it. After we hung up, I stood on the balcony a moment longer, processing what had just happened. My father had reached out, had acknowledged his failure, had asked for a chance to know me better. It was a small step, but a significant one. When I returned to the gallery, I saw it with fresh eyes. This room full of artists, collectors, and appreciators represented the life I had built for myself. These were people who valued creativity and authenticity, who saw my differences as assets rather than flaws. Jackson Reed caught my eye from across the room and raised his glass slightly in acknowledgement. I smiled back, feeling a connection that had nothing to do with family obligation and everything to do with mutual respect. By the time the event ended at midnight, I had completely forgotten that it was Rebecca's wedding day. Instead, my mind was filled with the images I'd captured, the connections I'd made, and the possibilities that had opened up. I had spent the day doing meaningful work, surrounded by people who appreciated my talents. As I packed up my equipment, Angela approached with a satisfied smile. "You were exactly right for this event, Hannah." The gallery owner was impressed, said you captured the essence of the evening. He wants to discuss using some of your images for their permanent promotional materials. I felt a surge of professional pride. It was a good night. Angela squeezed my shoulder. Sometimes the universe has perfect timing. Today could have been about what you were missing out on. Instead, it became about what you're building for yourself. She was right. I had entered a significant turning point, choosing to focus on my strengths rather than my wounds. The family wedding I'd been excluded from had taken place without me, but I hadn't spent the day dwelling in rejection. I had spent it moving forward into a future of my own creation. A week after the wedding, I was in the studio editing the gallery photos when my phone buzzed with a notification. The online arts magazine Art Current had published a feature on the Wyland Gallery opening, including 3 of my photographs. The article specifically mentioned the evocative documentary-style images captured by emerging photographer Hannah Mitchell. I was still smiling at the unexpected recognition when another notification popped up, a social media tag from my cousin Sarah showing the family gathered at Rebecca's wedding. The formal photographs showed everyone arranged in careful groups, all wearing coordinated colors of navy, silver, and blush. My mother stood proudly beside Rebecca, her expression triumphant. My father looked uncomfortable in his tuxedo, his smile not reaching his eyes. My absence was obvious. There was a gap in the family grouping where I would have stood between my parents, a visual confirmation of my exclusion. I closed the app quickly, but not before noticing something. In the less formal reception photos, my father appeared increasingly withdrawn, standing at the edges of groups rather than participating fully. I threw myself into my work over the next few days, riding the wave of positive feedback from the gallery event. Jackson Reed had emailed requesting my portfolio, and I spent hours selecting my strongest images and writing my artist statement. This potential opportunity, at the Brennan Museum, could significantly advance my career. I was so focused on professional matters that when my doorbell rang unexpectedly the following Saturday morning, I almost didn't answer it. Assuming it was a package delivery, I opened the door without checking first and found myself face-to-face with Rebecca. She stood in my hallway wearing designer jeans and a cashmere sweater, her blonde hair pulled back in a perfect ponytail, looking like she had stepped out of a catalogue. The diamond on her left hand caught the light as she shifted uncomfortably. "Rebecca." I stepped back in shock. "What are you doing here?" "Can I come in?" she asked. When I didn't immediately respond, she added, "Please, Hannah. I flew out this morning. I need to talk to you." I moved aside to let her enter, my mind racing. Rebecca had never visited me in Chicago before. She looked around my apartment with curious eyes, taking in the gallery wall of my photographs, the mismatched vintage furniture, the potted plants crowding my windowsills. "Your place is nice," she said, sounding surprised. "It's very you." I wasn't sure if that was a compliment, but decided to take it as one. "Thanks. Would you like some coffee or tea?" "Coffee would be great." "Black is fine." I moved to the kitchen and started the coffee maker, using the familiar routine to gather my thoughts. When I returned with 2 mugs, Rebecca was standing in front of my photographs, studying them intently. "These are really good," she said, accepting the coffee. "You're talented, Hannah." I never really understood that before. We sat on opposite ends of my couch, an awkward silence stretching between us. Finally, I asked the obvious question. "Why are you here, Rebecca? Shouldn't you be on your honeymoon?" She stared down at her coffee. "We're going to Bali next week." I needed to see you first." She took a deep breath. "I came to apologize." Of all the things I had expected, an apology wasn't one of them. "For not inviting me to your wedding?" "Yes. And for letting Aunt Clara convince me it was the right decision." She looked up at me, her eyes troubled. "After the wedding, I couldn't stop thinking about how wrong it felt that you weren't there. Dad mentioned it too, said it felt like we were pretending a family member didn't exist." I stayed silent, waiting for her to continue. "The thing is, Hannah, your mom told me you didn't want to come. She said you told her the whole wedding scene wasn't your thing, and you'd feel uncomfortable." Rebecca's expression was earnest. "I believed her because you always did seem uncomfortable at family events. But then your dad mentioned calling you during the reception, and I realized something wasn't adding up." The revelation that my mother had lied to both of us hit me like a physical blow. She told me that everyone, including you, agreed I shouldn't be invited because of how I look. That I'd ruin your perfect day, and the magazine photos. Rebecca winced. "That's not entirely untrue. Your mom and mine did bring up concerns about your appearance. But I never explicitly said you couldn't come. I let them make the decision and didn't question it." She set down her coffee. "That's on me, and I'm sorry." I processed this information slowly. So my mother manipulated both of us. "She's always been good at that," Rebecca admitted. "Playing people against each other, controlling the narrative." She hesitated. "Can I ask you something? Have you always felt like an outsider in the family?" The question opened a floodgate. For the next hour, I told Rebecca about growing up under my mother's constant criticism, the comparisons to her, the feeling that nothing I did was ever good enough. I told her about the Sweet 16 party and the too small pink dress, about my high school graduation where my achievements were dismissed, about the years of trying and failing to earn my mother's approval. Rebecca listened with growing horror. "I had no idea it was that bad," she said when I finished. "I knew Aunt Clara could be critical, but I didn't realize how relentless it was." "You were her golden standard," I explained. "Everything I wasn't, she pointed to you as the example I should follow." "That's awful," Rebecca said quietly. "For both of us, really. She put you down and used me as the weapon. No wonder we were never close." She looked around at my photographs again. "You've built an amazing life despite all that. I'm just starting to realize how strong you must be." Her words were unexpectedly healing. For years, I had assumed Rebecca saw me the same way my mother did, as the lesser cousin, the family disappointment. Learning that she respected my path helped dissolve some of the resentment I had carried. "Would you show me some of your work?" she asked suddenly. "I want to understand what you do." I pulled out my portfolio and my laptop with additional digital images. As I showed her my photographs and explained my approach, Rebecca asked thoughtful questions. She seemed genuinely interested, not just making a polite effort. "You see things differently," she said, studying a portrait series I had done of Chicago street musicians. "You find beauty in unexpected places." We ordered lunch and continued talking, cautiously rebuilding a connection that had never been allowed to form naturally. As afternoon turned to evening, Rebecca brought up the subject we had been circling around. "Your mom, Aunt Clara, has been manipulating all of us for years," she said. "My mom too. They've controlled the family narrative about you, and we all just accepted it without question." I nodded. "That's how manipulation works. It's subtle and persistent." "I think we need to confront them," Rebecca said, surprising me again. "Together. They need to understand that they can't keep driving wedges between family members." The thought of confronting my mother made my stomach clench with anxiety, but Rebecca's presence offered a new kind of support I had never had within the family. "When?" I asked. "I'm here until tomorrow evening. We could video call them in the morning." That night, after Rebecca left for her hotel, I called Jasmine and told her everything. "Are you sure you want to do this?" she asked, concerned. "Your mother has never responded well to being challenged." "I'm not doing it to change her," I explained. "I'm doing it to stand up for myself, to say my piece. With Rebecca backing me up, they'll at least have to listen." The next morning, Rebecca returned to my apartment, and we set up the video call. My hands were shaking as I dialed, but Rebecca's steady presence beside me helped calm my nerves. My mother answered, her face filling the screen. "Hannah." "Rebecca. What's going on?" "Rebecca, I thought you were in New York this weekend." "I'm in Chicago, Aunt Clara," Rebecca said firmly. "With Hannah. We need to talk." My mother's expression shifted from confusion to wariness. "About what?" "About the wedding," I said. "And about the lies you told both of us." For the next hour, Rebecca and I took turns explaining what we had learned, how my mother had told me one story and Rebecca another, how she had manipulated the situation to ensure my exclusion, how this pattern had been repeated throughout my life. My mother initially denied everything, claiming we had misunderstood or were exaggerating. But with both of us presenting a united front, supported by specific examples and dates, her denials became less convincing. "I was only trying to protect the family image," she finally said defensively. "Hannah has always insisted on drawing attention to herself with that blue hair and those tattoos. What would people think? They might think that our family accepts individuality and supports each other's choices," Rebecca replied coolly. "Instead of pretending we're perfect while treating one of our own like an embarrassment." My mother's face hardened. "You don't understand the pressures of maintaining social standing, Rebecca. Your mother and I have worked hard to ensure the family is respected." "At what cost?" I asked quietly. "You've spent my entire life trying to force me into a mold I don't fit, and when that failed, you simply excluded me. Do you know how much that hurts?" For a brief moment, I thought I saw a flicker of regret in my mother's eyes, but it was quickly replaced by her usual defensive pride. "You chose to be different, Hannah. You chose to reject family traditions and expectations. There are consequences to those choices." "Yes," I agreed, surprising her. "There are consequences. One of them is that I've built a life where I'm valued for who I am, not criticized for who I'm not. Another is that I'm setting boundaries with you, starting today." I outlined my boundaries clearly. I would no longer attend family events where I wasn't fully welcome as myself. I would end phone calls if she began criticizing my appearance or career. I would limit contact if necessary to protect my mental health. You can't just dictate terms to your own mother, she protested. I'm not dictating anything, I replied calmly. I'm telling you what I need to maintain a relationship with you. It's your choice whether to respect those needs or not. The call ended without a clear resolution. My mother was angry and defensive, unwilling to acknowledge her role in the family dynamics. But something important had shifted. Rebecca and I had stood together, supporting each other's truth instead of allowing ourselves to be pitted against one another. After the call, Rebecca hugged me tightly. That was harder than I expected, she admitted. Thank you for backing me up, I said. Having someone else from the family validate my experience, it means more than I can express. I should have done it years ago, she replied. I'm sorry, I didn't see what was happening. We parted with promises to stay in touch, to build a cousin relationship independent of our mother's influence. As I closed the door behind Rebecca, I felt a complex mixture of emotions: exhaustion from the confrontation, sadness that my mother remained unchanged, but also a profound sense of liberation. I had finally spoken my truth, set clear boundaries, and found an unexpected ally within my family. The path forward remained uncertain, but for the first time, I wasn't walking it entirely alone. 6 months after the wedding and the confrontation with my mother, I stood in the center of the Brennan Contemporary Art Museum's smallest exhibition space, surrounded by my photographs. The culmination of months of work, Urban Identities, Portraits of Chicago, was my first solo exhibition, a collection of images capturing the diverse faces and spaces of my adopted city. Jackson Reed, who had championed my work to the museum board, stood nearby chatting with potential buyers. He caught my eye and winked, a gesture that had become familiar over the past months, as our professional relationship had gradually evolved into something more personal. My blue hair was now streaked with silver, an experiment I'd tried for the exhibition that suited me surprisingly well. I wore a vintage black dress with comfortable boots, looking both professional and authentically myself. Gone was the anxious young woman always worried about being judged. In her place stood an artist confident in her vision and voice. The confidence hadn't come easily. After the confrontation with my mother, our relationship had entered a strained new phase. She had initially responded with hurt silence, ignoring my calls and messages. When we did speak again, nearly a month later, she was careful and distant, as if unsure how to interact with a daughter who had set clear boundaries. My father, however, had surprised me. True to his word, he had visited Chicago twice on his own, each time making genuine efforts to know me better. During his first visit, I had shown him my studio and introduced him to my colleagues. He had asked questions about my photographic process, admitted his complete ignorance about art, but expressed willingness to learn. I've missed so much of your life, Hannah, he had said over dinner at my favorite neighborhood restaurant. I don't want to miss any more. His support, though late in coming, helped heal a wound I had carried since childhood. When the Brennan accepted my exhibition proposal, he was the first person I called. I'm proud of you, he had said, words I had waited a lifetime to hear. Now, scanning the crowded exhibition space, I spotted him entering with Rebecca. They had both flown in for the opening night, another gesture of support I hadn't expected. Rebecca waved enthusiastically when she saw me, then paused to study the nearest photograph, a portrait of an elderly jazz musician performing in a small club, his weathered face illuminated by a single spotlight. As they made their way toward me, I noticed my father holding a small gift bag. He hugged me awkwardly, but warmly when he reached me. This is incredible, Hannah, he said, gesturing to the exhibition. I don't know much about photography, but even I can see how special these images are. Rebecca embraced me next. In the months since her wedding, we had built a fragile, but growing friendship, texting regularly and video calling every few weeks. The museum is stunning, and so is your work. I've been bragging about my cousin the artist to all my colleagues. The idea of Rebecca proudly claiming our relationship, instead of distancing herself from me, was still new and touching. Thank you both for coming, I said sincerely. It means a lot to have family here tonight. My father cleared his throat and handed me the gift bag. This isn't much, but I wanted to give you something to mark the occasion. Inside was a small, vintage silver picture frame. In it was a photograph I had never seen before, myself at about 7 years old, sitting at an easel with paint-covered hands and an expression of pure joy and concentration. Where did you find this? I asked, touched by the unexpected glimpse of my childhood self, already in love with creating. It was in the attic in an old album. I remember that day. You were painting for hours, completely lost in it. I should have paid more attention to how happy it made you. His eyes were damp. I should have encouraged your talent instead of echoing your mother's concerns about practicality. The acknowledgement of his past failures and his desire to make amends now was healing in a way I hadn't anticipated. I hugged him again, this time without awkwardness. The exhibition opening continued around us, a steady stream of art lovers and critics examining my work. Jackson introduced me to several important contacts in the art world, and Angela from the studio moved through the crowd proudly, having given me my first professional opportunities. Jasmine arrived with a group of our friends, all dressed dramatically for the occasion. They formed a boisterous support section, taking photos and cheering loudly when the museum director mentioned my name in her opening remarks. As I looked around the room, the contrast between my chosen family and my biological one struck me profoundly. My friends had been there through every struggle, celebrating every small victory along the way. My blood relations were newer to the support role, learning gradually how to connect with the person I truly was rather than the daughter they had imagined. Noticeably absent was my mother. She had been invited to the exhibition, an olive branch I had extended despite our strained relationship, but had declined, citing a previous engagement. Her absence stung slightly, but no longer devastated me. I had stopped measuring my worth by her approval. After the formal part of the opening concluded, my father approached me again. Your mother sends her congratulations, he said hesitantly. She's trying, Hannah. This is all very new territory for her. I nodded, not wanting to dismiss his message, but also not willing to pretend my mother's half-hearted efforts were enough. I understand. Change is hard, especially when you've held onto certain beliefs for decades. She looked at your website, he added. I showed her the exhibition announcement. She didn't say much, but she looked at every image. That's something, at least. It was something, a tiny step rather than the complete transformation I had once desperately hoped for. I had learned to appreciate these small movements without expecting dramatic change. Later that evening, after most guests had departed, I found myself standing with Jackson in front of my favorite image in the exhibition, a photograph of an elderly couple dancing in a public park, their faces lined with age but lit with joy. This one speaks to me, Jackson said, his hand lightly touching the small of my back. The way you captured their connection, their history together. It's beautiful. They've been married 62 years, I told him. They told me they dance in the park every Sunday, weather permitting. It's their tradition. Jackson turned to face me. Would you have dinner with me tomorrow? Not as colleagues or friends, but as a proper date. The question didn't surprise me as much as it might have months earlier. Our growing closeness had been building toward this moment. I'd like that, I replied, feeling a flutter of nervous anticipation. The exhibition marked more than a professional milestone. It represented a personal transformation, from the insecure young woman desperate for family approval to an artist standing firmly in her own power. The wounds of rejection hadn't disappeared completely, but they had scarred over, no longer raw and bleeding. In the following months, I maintained the boundaries I had set with my mother. Sometimes she respected them, other times she tested them, slipping into old critical patterns. When she did, I would gently end the conversation, or change the subject, consistent in my self-protection, without anger or drama. My relationship with Jackson developed slowly, built on mutual respect and shared passion for art. He appreciated my blue hair and tattoos, seeing them as expressions of my creativity rather than rebellious statements. With him, I never felt the need to defend or explain my choices. For Thanksgiving, I hosted a gathering in my apartment, inviting my chosen family of friends along with my father, Rebecca, and somewhat to my surprise, my mother, who accepted the invitation after some hesitation. The dinner wasn't without tension. My mother looked uncomfortable among my eclectic friends, her conservative dress and manner contrasting with their more expressive styles. But she made an effort, asking polite questions about their work and interests, accepting a glass of wine from Jasmine with a stiff smile. When she complimented one of my photographs hanging in the dining room, I nearly dropped the serving dish I was holding. The praise, though slightly awkward and clearly practiced, was perhaps the first genuine positive comment she had ever made about my art. "Thank you," I said simply, not making a big deal of the moment, but treasuring it nonetheless. Later, as guests were leaving, my mother pulled me aside. "This isn't the life I imagined for you," she said, gesturing around my apartment. "But I can see that you've built something meaningful. In your own way." It wasn't a full acceptance of my choices, but it was an acknowledgement that my path had value, however different from her expectations. I didn't need more than that now. I had found acceptance in too many other places to hunger for hers. The photograph of my father, Rebecca, and me at the exhibition opening now sat prominently on my bookshelf, a visual reminder of the family connections I was rebuilding on healthier terms. Beside it was the childhood painting photo my father had given me, a bridge between my past and present selves. The absence of a wedding photo in the collection no longer bothered me. That exclusion had set me on a path to finding my true voice and value. In a strange way, I was grateful for it now, not for the hurt it had caused, but for the growth it had ultimately triggered. When I look back at that painful phone call from my mother, I see it as the breaking point that finally forced me to confront the dysfunctional family dynamics I had been navigating my entire life. Being explicitly rejected was in some ways easier than the years of implicit disapproval it was too clear to ignore or explain away. The journey from rejection to self-acceptance wasn't linear or simple. There were still days when old insecurities surfaced, when a casual comment from my mother could temporarily shake my confidence. But those moments became less frequent and less powerful as I strengthened my sense of self. I had learned that healing doesn't always require forgiveness in the traditional sense. Sometimes it means accepting that certain relationships will never be what you hoped for, and finding peace with that reality. Sometimes it means creating family bonds where none existed before, as Rebecca and I had done. Most importantly, I had learned that I didn't need to be perfect, or conventional, or anything other than authentically myself to be worthy of love and belonging. The very qualities my mother had criticized, my creativity, my different perspective, my willingness to stand out, were the foundations of my success and happiness. If you're watching this and feeling like the black sheep in your family, know that you're not alone. Your worth isn't determined by those who fail to see your unique gifts. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is to stop seeking approval from those who aren't capable of giving it, and instead build connections with people who celebrate you exactly as you are. Thank you for witnessing my story. If it resonated with you, please like this video and subscribe to my channel for more authentic conversations about family dynamics and self-acceptance. Share your own experiences in the comments below. What boundaries have you set in challenging relationships? How have you found healing after rejection? I read every comment and draw strength from this supportive community we're building together. Until next time, remember that sometimes the family you create is more nurturing than the one you were born into.